Bob Herbert's op-ed.tv is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation with the support of Ann Ulnick. Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to op-ed.tv. There has been tremendous coverage of the abusive sexual behavior of powerful men across a number of high-profile industries. Many are being called to account by women who have courageously raised their voices to say, enough, this has to stop. But what about the millions of women working every day at lower-paying jobs in fields that are not glamorous, not at all high-profile? Who listens to them when they are subjected to sexually abusive behavior? What recourse do they have? My guest is Sarah Leonard, who is the features editor at The Nation magazine and an editor-at-large at Dissent. She has written an op-ed article in the New York Times that addresses this important issue. The headline on the article, Want to Stop Predators? Organize. Sarah, welcome. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much.
So let's talk about the women in some of these lower paying occupations. So ordinary restaurant workers, fast food workers, maids, domestic workers, that sort of thing. What are the kind of challenges that they face on the job?
Well, one problem that's specific to working class women in dealing with sexual harassment is a lot of women work for tips. The tipped economy is disproportionately staffed by women. And so in order to get your tips, you have to please the customer, right? So if the customer is making comments that you don't like or grabbing you, there's an extra incentive not to report it and to just sort of suffer through it. Because if you're going to make a decent wage at the end of the day, you rely on tips. And if you are a tipped worker, you probably work for the tipped minimum wage, which is lower than the normal minimum wage. You're supposed to make it up in tips. So you're sort of trapped. Another problem that working women face is isolation. So if you're a domestic worker who lives alone in an employer's household, or if you're a hotel maid who goes door to door in a hotel by yourself, you're frequently caught alone without any other colleagues. And if someone wants to, again, make comments, grab you, whatever, you have very little recourse in the moment, at least. And often, more broadly, when you report it, you're not supported. But in those moments, you're isolated, and that's a real danger.
And then a lot of the workers, and I think especially domestic workers, but others as well, are immigrants, in some cases undocumented. Talk a little bit about their circumstances.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous position to be in because if you are working without papers, of course you want to stay under the radar. And the vast majority of domestic workers are women of color who are immigrants. And they don't have a union. They don't have an organization that represents them, although now the Domestic Workers United have passed domestic worker bills of rights in some states, but still you're likely to not have day-to-day contact with someone who represents you. And so you are either going to have to tolerate the abuse or find another employer who's willing to maybe pay you under the table. And that's not easy to do. These folks are extremely at risk. And often they're away even from their families because the reason a lot of domestic workers come to the States is to send money back to their families. So they're doubly isolated.
Right. Now, there's been this entire series of well-known, well-off, high-profile men who have had allegations against them of sexual abuse or sexual assault. And people are surprised at the sheer numbers that they're seeing. It strikes me that if this is the case, if there are so many famous people coming to the fore that we're surprised, that the number of women who have to put up with the kind of stuff that we're talking about must be enormous, because most cases never come to the fore. In most cases, the men who are the offenders are not well known. Is there any way to characterize just how widespread is this problem of sexual abuse, sexual harassment, sexual assault on the job?
Well, it's hard to know. The answer is no to some degree. If you look for numbers of cases of sexual abuse of hotel workers, of domestic workers, of farm workers, you actually won't find reliable stats at all because there's no institution that's going around taking surveys. A lot of folks don't have unions. Some of the few reports we do have are put together by unions who represent hotel workers, restaurant workers, and so forth. The EEOC receives about 7,000 sexual harassment complaints a year, the Equal Opportunity Commission, and they say that 90% of cases are probably not reported to them at all. And they also estimate that 70% of cases are not even reported to an employer because people are afraid of being fired. And so many women work in precarious economic circumstances where they're depending on a job with no protection.
The point of your article is summed up in the headline, the importance of organizing. Explain how organizing can make a substantial difference when we're talking about these kinds of problems.
Yeah, so one way to think about it, of course, is if you are a celebrity and, it may still be difficult, but if someone did something to you and you have an enormous Twitter following, you're quite famous, people look up to you maybe, you can say, Harvey Weinstein abused me in X way, and you can get some attention on that question. If you are working in the fields, for example, in Florida, and you have a boss who comes out in the field and harasses you or demands sex, the odds are you don't have a Twitter account with millions of followers, and you're not going to be able to shame that person out of a job. Every working woman knows that you cannot deal with a scary boss by yourself. They'll fire you. And so organizing is a way of women having collective power in order to deal with abusive bosses, even abusive colleagues too, because you have to have that strength in numbers if you don't have that strength through fame or money. And so we've seen some really great examples of this. So hotel workers in Chicago, for example, through their union, Unite Here, they got panic buttons that they can take with them on the job. So if they get trapped in a room alone, they can hit a button. I reported on a group of hotel workers in Boston, and one form of sex discrimination they faced was being forced to take on heavy loads while they were pregnant. And so when they finally unionized, they got a contract, they put in pregnancy requirements for the first time in hotel organizing history in Boston. The Immokalee workers in Florida, who are largely...
These are farm workers.
Yeah, these are farm workers who work under pretty tough conditions. A lot of them are immigrants. And through a public relations campaign and through work strikes and so forth, they were able to get a labor contract that meant that all these fast food chains that use their tomatoes, like Taco Bell, would have to support a set of labor regulations, or they would have a big disruption in their supply chain. And they were smart enough that they built into that labor agreement protections against sexual harassment.
Right.
And they've gotten, I believe, 23 managers disciplined or fired along those lines because they built that into their contract. And the companies have an economic incentive not to violate that contract. And so that's really collective power in action.
Most of the women that we're talking about do not belong to unions. If you're not in a union, but you do want to organize, you'd like to reach out and pull people together, what are some of the things women can do? Do you have any advice for women in that situation?
Definitely. So I work at The Nation magazine, and we actually are unionized with the News Guild, which is part of Communications Workers of America, a national union.
Right.
And I actually often talk to people in other media organizations about how to organize. And I say, you want to first start by talking to some trusted people in your workplace and sort of feeling them out. Do they also think that having more collective power at work would be a good thing? Are they willing to take a little bit of risk? in finding out who else in the office might be interested. Bosses usually don't like when you organize, so you want to keep that a little quiet.
They usually don't.
And sort of built in. So you want to do that. And then you want to reach out to a union organizer who works with a union that's in your industry. So for me, I'll tell people, you can call our contact at the News Guild. And for people in other industries, sometimes it's not totally obvious. And so what you want to do is look around to other businesses that do similar work and find one that's unionized. And then you can get in touch with someone there and say, hey, do you like your union? Could you put me in touch with your union rep?
Right.
And usually someone can do that. So with the Boston hotel workers, for example, they thought that a union was a good idea because they knew so many other people doing their exact same work at other hotels that were unionized, and they got paid more and they had better work hours and all of those things. So they reached out to them, right? And then that brought Unite here to the hotel.
You mentioned that it's so helpful to unions if you bring in additional members, if you're bringing women in who are concerned about these issues and other issues. You may be concerned about pay, you may be concerned about working conditions or benefits and that sort of thing. That it's beneficial overall that you begin to build this solidarity that you may not have realized was there in the first place. There's a truly fascinating historical point in your article about teenage girls back in the 1830s working in the mills in Salem, Massachusetts. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so one of the first women's labor actions in this country was in Salem, and this was early industrialization. Women were going to work in factories for the first time, and often they were young, and they would be supporting their families, their brothers, they'd be sending money back home. And so they were working very long hours. They were living in boarding houses that were just many other young women. They didn't have protection of really any kind, and they were often abused at work. When bosses have sort of unilateral control over unprotected workers, we know what happens. They exercise power in all sorts of unattractive ways, including through sexual harassment. And so these girls were sexually harassed, they were raped, they were impregnated, and subjected to all sorts of humiliations. And so when they went on strike, it was over many working conditions.
Right.
But explicitly included in that was an end to the sexual predations of their managers. And this actually carried through a lot of complaints throughout the industrializing period. And male workers were often on board with supporting women and getting rid of these problems because they viewed it as a violation of workers' freedoms in general. The idea that you could abuse and harass a worker with impunity is unattractive to anyone who's in a union. And so you saw an actual level of solidarity there that I think we should take as an example. It was not always successful, but these complaints and these solutions actually go back a pretty long way. And actually in 1903, the Women's Trade Union League was formed, which included women from lots of different industries, including more white-collar industries,
right.
So secretaries and so forth, and some middle-class women, with the idea that there were problems that all women faced. And I think that that's actually a really interesting example for today when there's so much women's activism on any number of issues and protests. And you feel like there should be a way for them to all come together to fight this thing that we're facing. And so I think we can actually look to some historical models.
I agree, and I think that it's really fascinating that you can go back that far. The power, it seems to me that we've lost in many ways the idea of the power of organizing, but maybe we're coming back to that. People are so concerned about the stuff.
Well, and I think one
that's
reason
going on today. Go ahead.
Is just that while women have seen an increase in their sort of representation as women, women can be professionals, women can work outside the home, women are seemingly equal. everyone has seen a decline in their protection as workers.
Right.
And Judith Levine has written beautifully about this. And so you seem like you should have more power, but you feel very viscerally that you don't. And that disconnect, I think, makes people turn back again towards organizing.
And this power disconnect that you're talking about, you see it everywhere. When there's a big power imbalance, that's when you see the abuses, sexual and otherwise. And one of the things that you mentioned when we were talking was we've been talking here about women in lower wage industries, but you had mentioned Silicon Valley. And once again, very often a big power imbalance between men and women. So talk a little bit about your concerns about what goes on in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting example of how directly correlated unchecked economic power is with sexual harassment and abuse. We've seen famous companies that are headed by men like Uber have huge gender problems, and the CEO had to step down in large part because of that. But we've also seen that in companies in Silicon Valley that are headed up by women, there has been sexual harassment. And so CEOs and founders like Miki Agrawal, who founded Thinks, which is supposedly a very feminist company, was accused by her employees of rampant sexual harassment, including comments, groping, inappropriate phone calls, all sorts of things. And I think what this is showing is, of course, men still commit the majority of sexual harassment because there is power in being male.
Right.
But there's also power in being in sort of the top rung of a company. And in Silicon Valley, there's the unchecked power of the founder, where in a company, the founder is really fetishized. They're the unique genius making everything happen. They're heavily compensated, and everybody else is disposable. And I think that really comes through in some of the cases we've seen. And it's a good reminder that economic power breeds exactly this sort of abuse, even under female supervision often.
We've been talking about the importance of organizing, and labor unions are the quintessential organizing tool. But even in labor unions, you can have the kind of abuses that we're talking about. So what are some of the problems that women have faced even within labor unions?
Yeah, so of course there are problems between colleagues who work in a workplace, workers, male and female. There can be the same sort of sexual harassment and abuse, and men can use their power over women to treat them badly and make them uncomfortable at work. I talked with Ellen Bravo. She was one of the early organizers of 9 to 5, which is an organization that helps women in the workplace overcome sexual harassment and also runs trainings to teach people, including people in unions, how to change their work culture. So she would go into all these sort of funny situations where she'd do a sexual harassment training for a group of firefighters who were forced to take it, and they're all rolling their eyes. And this was a time when there were only a few female firefighters, and they're being given a really hard time. And she would say to these workers, look, every time you sexually harass a woman, you are dividing the shop. You are creating a lack of solidarity among workers by showing your colleagues that they're not valued, and you're helping the boss. Every time you sexually harass, you're helping the boss. And that was a very powerful argument. And of course, you want them to take the next step and understand at a deeper level that it's morally wrong to do these things to people. And I think a lot of people deep down know that. But when you want to change people's behavior, that's a very compelling argument.
Have you seen a change in the view or even the level of consciousness of younger women on issues like this?
Definitely. I think there's always been a mentality among most working women that there's a certain amount of crap you have to put up with. Right. And, I talked with my grandmother about this actually, and she said, we didn't really make such a big thing out of it. This wasn't the language that we had. Are people even allowed to flirt anymore? And then she told me a story about when she had experienced sexual harassment and had to just figure out how to deal with it on her own,
Right.
which she did. And so in a way, I think we are facing extremely similar problems to even our grandmothers. And what we're learning now is that there's a critical mass of people who are happy to say that it's not normal and thereby make it not normal.
It's interesting because if you talk to your grandmother, if you talk to your contemporaries, if anyone talks to women that they know or even strangers, you get a sense of just how pervasive a problem this is. I mean, it just seems in terms of numbers, almost overwhelming. In order for this to change on a sustained basis, the culture has to be changed. It's women who have been harassed or assaulted obviously should have their complaints taken care of. But to change the culture, how does that happen? How do we get to a point where women in the workplace are valued, respected, treated as equals, just in general? Do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, so I think sometimes when we talk about sexual harassment, especially now that so much has been revealed, it does feel overwhelming. And every time a new allegation comes out, we're like, oh God, him too? Like, this is exhausting. Can't we trust anybody? And the way to deal with it, I think, is to break it down into slightly more manageable problems than the entire culture. If sexual harassment is fostered and protected by power, the answer is to change the power dynamics. So we know that in one office or in one, in the fields where people are working for one company, you can change this by creating consequences. If everybody knows, for example, in the case of the Immokalee workers, all the managers know that guy got fired.
Right.
They're not going to participate in the same behavior, and at least not as widely. And the same thing goes for an office environment where it becomes unacceptable because people don't want to get fired for sexually harassing. People come to understand that it's unacceptable. And so I think part of the long-term answer is in seriously reducing the hierarchies that people work under. So that means unions are extremely important because that's the way that you prevent a workplace from having a king and then a bunch of people with absolutely no power. And then there are sort of national regulations that of course could help with that. And there is some legislation being passed in sort of bits and pieces around reporting sexual harassment, for example, making that easier, what sorts of regulations companies need to have. But I think a further step in that might be we've seen a sort of divide, I think, between the people who are famous and get a lot of attention for this sort of thing and people who are maybe work in the fields or in homes and don't get much attention. And I think that we will only solve this problem once we can unite all of those women and show that it's a broad systemic problem that has to do with power imbalances. And, in The Nation recently, Jane Fonda actually wrote about how she is working with the Restaurant Opportunity Center, which is representing tipped workers, to work in solidarity with them to to get rid of the tip minimum wage. And so that's like one little thing where you start to see maybe people who have loud voices and people who have large numbers can start working together to show that we have to change these big power dynamics. We need unions, and sort of move that conversation into a more concrete realm instead of worrying about abstractly changing the culture, which can feel so overwhelming.
So step by step, very quickly, are you optimistic or pessimistic that we are actually, or in fact, moving in the right direction?
I am optimistic that we are developing a broader understanding of the problem, but I'm not going to be optimistic about solving it until we are moving on a different path in terms of workers' rights. And that's what's really being attenuated, particularly by the Republican Congress and president right now, the president himself perhaps having a stake in the sexual harassment debate. And I think until we turn the spotlight on those very concrete issues, we're not going to move forward in a way that's going to last.
We're going to have to stop there. Sarah Leonard, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. We recently passed the 5th anniversary of the awful tragedy at the Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. 26 people were killed when a young man named Adam Lanza invaded the school and opened fire. 20 of the victims were 6 or 7-year-old children. Lanza had already killed his mother and would also kill himself. Nicole Hockley was the mother of one of the young children who were killed. She has posted a message on her Facebook page that went viral. Referring to President Trump, she wrote, "Not only did he ignore the 5-year remembrance completely, not even a single tweet, he slapped us all in the face by having none other than National Rifle Association President Wayne LaPierre at his White House Christmas party that night." Ms. Hockley continued, "The appalling lack of humanity and decency has not gone unnoticed. While they ignorantly partied and remained uninformed on an issue that kills thousands of Americans every year, I was crying myself to sleep. While they got the chance to kiss their children goodnight, I kissed the urn holding my beautiful boy's ashes." That's all for now. See you next time.